Welcome to the Bill Walton Show, featuring conversations with leaders, entrepreneurs, artists, and thinkers. Fresh perspectives on money, culture, politics, and human flourishing. Interesting people, interesting things.
Over the course of the past year, I've hosted several shows exploring China, its long history, its economic success and growth in the last 40 years, and its big ambitions for the 21st century. It's a vast subject, something Americans need to know much more about, and one where I feel that I have barely scratched the surface. But one thing has become very clear to me. China is no champion of human rights as we conceive of them in the West. The most recent Congressional Executive Commission on China reports that, while the Chinese economy has grown dramatically, the Chinese Communist Party has become even more deeply committed to preserving its monopoly on power through state-sponsored repression, surveillance, and indoctrination. So, to learn more about human rights in China, I've asked three people with firsthand experience to join me on today's show. Reggie Littlejohn is the founder and president of Women's Rights Without Frontiers, a graduate of Yale Law School, and an experienced litigation attorney. She is an acclaimed international expert on China's one-child policy. Her organization has been called the leading voice in the battle to expose and oppose forced abortion and the sex-selective abortion of females in China. Welcome, Reggie.
Thank you so much.
Chen Guancheng is a Chinese civil rights lawyer and activist who has been a persistent voice for freedom, human dignity, and the rule of law in his native country. Working in rural communities in China, where he was known as the barefoot lawyer, Chen advocated for the rights of disabled people and organized class action litigation against the government's violent enforcement of its one-child policy. Blind since his childhood, Chen is self-taught in the law. His human rights activism resulted in his imprisonment by the Chinese government for 4 years. Beginning in 2006, after his release, he remained under house arrest until his escape from confinement in 2012, whereupon he came to the United States, where he is now a distinguished fellow at Catholic University's Center for Human Rights. Welcome, Chen.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, talk with you.
Delighted to have you here. And helping out and assisting and as a fourth voice or third voice in this show is Huchen Zhang, who's senior editor of the China branch for the Voice of America, who will be helping interpret for Guangcheng, and we'll also have some points of view that we want to have you hear from you. So welcome.
Thank you. It's an honor.
Looking forward to the conversation. Reggie, how did you get involved in this issue?
Well, it all kind of happened because I was a litigation attorney in San Francisco in the 90s, and I represented a Chinese refugee in her case for political asylum in the United States, and she was persecuted as a Christian and forcibly sterilized. And what I mean by that is that
when was this?
This was in the mid 90s when I represented her.
Right.
So this is a while back.
Yeah.
So what happened to her is that she, I guess, violated the one-child policy at the time. She had 2 children, so she was literally picked up and dragged from her home, held down to a table. She was sliced open. Her tubes were tied. All of this without anesthesia, and so she had permanent disabilities because of that. And I just remember sitting behind my desk in San Francisco thinking, here I am living the American dream, and there are women on the other side of the world who are getting forcibly sterilized, forcibly aborted up to the 9th month of pregnancy. And so I dedicated my life.
Briefly, the one-child policy. Guangcheng, what the one-child policy? What is that?
实际上呢，中国的这个一胎化政策一直是靠暴力推行的。在2005年的时候，中共就通过党委直接下发一个红头文件，就是说完全放弃法律，通过传统的也就是暴力的手段来推行这个政策。
The one-child policy in China has always been enforced through violence. as early as 2005, the Communist Party committees passed indications, passed orders, which says, forget about law. Let's just do the one-child policy.
And it was enforced, it was created because of population control?
Right. So under the Mao era, Chairman Mao had encouraged women to have babies, about 6 babies per woman. So then when Deng Xiaoping came into power, he said, oh my gosh, we've got this population explosion on our hand, and just started the one-child policy. It started in about 19...
He came in 76, so that would have been late 70s?
Well, it was 79 or 80,
Yeah,
depending
okay.
on when you want to count it. But it has been enforced through forced abortion, forced sterilization, and infanticide since the beginning.
And now, that proved to be a problem because of a growing imbalance between boys and girls. And this brings us to your issue, Reggie, because boys were perceived as more valuable than girls.
Right. So in China, ironically, the Chinese Communist Party does not really take care of its elderly at all. So what the elderly have in China is sons to help them to live in their old age. And if you have only one kid, people wanted that one child to be a boy because they felt that they had a choice of either committing gendercide against the girls or facing poverty in their old age. And at its height, the gender imbalance was 121 boys born for every 100 girls born. And that's led to a situation where there's an estimated 37 million more men living in China than women. And that is leading to human trafficking and sexual slavery and all kinds of other unintended consequences.
And Guancheng, this was your issue from the beginning in rural China. You saw this, you were appalled, and you took steps to call attention to it and end it, particularly the forced abortions and the, what do you call it, the gendercide?
Yeah, gendercide.
Yeah.
对这个事情呢，当就说中共开始有了计划生育法以后，法律当中明确规定的，中共所做的这些对妇女强抓、对家人强抓、对胎儿强制堕胎这些，从法律上讲都是违反中国的宪法、侵犯中国公民权利的。但是这个事情就像一个运动一样，在我们那个地区就广泛的推开，实际上当然是全国性的。这个时候，我觉得我们有义务把这样一个惨无人道的这样一个暴行去阻止它，并且让世界知道在中国发生了什么。
The family planning law of the Chinese Communist Party clearly says that they can use force against women, against their family members, and that they can use forced abortion, which is clearly in violation of the Chinese constitution. But this is what has been going on all these years. That's why we are fighting this.
And even though China, I guess, announced a two-child policy, the two-child policy really hasn't changed much. And I guess my question is, you all got involved in this 20 years ago. Is it still as pervasive today as it was then?
Well, just in terms of the two-child policy, as Guangcheng said, before they would kill every kid after one, now they kill every kid after two. It doesn't stop forced abortion, and it doesn't stop the forced abortion of unmarried women. I would say that it is less pervasive now than it was 20 years ago. And part of that is one of the reasons that they were, that the Chinese Communist Party gave to reduce it from a one-child policy to a two-child policy was international pressure and criticism. And Guangcheng and I have been the ones who've been pressuring the government more than anybody else to end these atrocities.
So there's been some success because of the sacrifice you made, 4 years in jail and detention.
有点进步，但是没有从根本上解除这个问题。中共对于计划生育的整个就是计生委系统，从中央到地方，这个整个系统都还在。
There has been some progress, but things have not changed fundamentally. The whole system, the whole family planning system is still intact.
原来这种对于比如说 中共就派小分队到农村去抓怀孕的妇女，到医院里就用暴力逼着你强制堕胎，而且还要你签字说这是你自己愿意的。那么如果抓不到这些怀孕的妇女，他就会抓她的父母、兄弟姐妹，甚至最严重的地方可以抓邻居，把这些邻居抓起来，然后关，有几天的，有几个月的都不一样，每天暴力对待他们。这样的状况呢，现在在中国国内就说情况比原来好多了。
A few years ago, the Communist Party used to send groups to rural areas to grab pregnant women. If they couldn't find them, to arrest their family members, even their neighbors. These people would be in jail for a few days, even for a few months. Things like this have improved a little bit.
But cutting through this, it doesn't seem like there's a legal system that prevents this from happening. It seems to we've got a Yale Law School grad here. It seems to me like this terrible thing's happening, and you've got no course of no way to respond.
Something that people in America need to understand is that when our U.S. Supreme Court promulgates a law, the whole nation has to obey it. That's not the case in China. China is much more decentralized than the United States, so that the Chinese government, even Beijing, can say, we're going to do this, and the provinces still have a lot of autonomy. And so on the provincial level, on the municipal level, according to the Congressional Executive Commission on China, there are many laws that say you need to forcibly abort women who do not have permission to have babies, and that remains up to this day. And if a woman tries to file a lawsuit saying I was illegally forcibly aborted, the courts will not take those suits. They will not hear the case. And a lot of times, the lawyer who brings the case will be detained.
The question for an American who's new to this issue, and I would put myself very much in that category, is it seems like the Communist Party control over virtually every aspect of what happens in China is near total. Is that an overstatement? Is that accurate?
Demographically, it makes no sense whatsoever for China to continue with the one-child policy, the two-child policy, a three-child policy, any course of population control, because they need more people. Mm-hmm. They have a rapidly aging population. They have a steep decline in their workforce, and they need more people. So why are they keeping this course of population control? It's for the reason that you state. I believe it is social control masquerading as population control, because the one-child policy or the two-child policy, whatever system that they have, whatever number they have, touches everyone. Now, you look at different human rights violations. You look at lawyers that are being detained, or religious persecution, or the persecution of ethnic minorities. All of these are slices of Chinese society. Mm-hmm. But the one-child policy touches every womb, every family in China, and it's a way to control the entire population through intimidation.
实际上呢，说中国共产党在中国控制一切一点都不过分，只是有时候它由于科技的落后，能力的有限，它对中国公民的反抗的不能够完全的控制，随着网络的发展，但这也是一个事实。中共可以通过任何一个，就是通过一个命令来让中国的公检法全部失效。你比如说计划生育问题，中共可以下达这个命令让他们不介入，那出现人被抓走、被打，甚至被逼迫死亡的情况，那你报警，警察不出警；你到法院起诉，法院不立案；到检察院控告，检察院不受理，就这样一个状态。
In reality, it's not an overstatement to say the Chinese Communist Party controls everything, every aspect of social life in China. Sometimes they couldn't do that because of the backwardness of their science and technology. But it is a fact that if the Chinese Communist Party wishes, they could order the police department, the courts, to refrain from getting involved in violations of human rights, especially in regard to family planning matters. If they tell the courts, the police, to stand aside, they're not stopping these violations of human rights.
1992年，中共通过中宣部向所有的媒体下达一个指令，就是说，关于计划生育当中的任何侵权问题不得报道。那么从那以后，就包括05年我们调查中国的暴力计生，好多人在这个过程中被逼死。但这样的事情，就是你在报道媒体的时候，这些记者就告诉我说，非常遗憾，92年他们给我们下达一个禁令，这个禁令到现在没有办法取消。那我们写了文章也发不出去，编辑会审查掉，所以这个就一点办法也没有。
In 1992, the Chinese Communist Party issued an order through its propaganda department telling the media not to report any violations in the course of enforcing family planning laws. So in 1995, Guangcheng and some friends went to a media reporter who told him, sorry, we can't do anything. We can't publish anything on family planning matters.
所以说，共产党绑架中国，共产党挟持中国政府，共产党通过这种绑架国家、挟持政府来奴役中国人民，一点都不过分。中国的这个政治体制完全不是一个正常政府的概念，所以我们不要用西方的这种政府的概念来理解中国共产党对于中国人民这种绑架和挟持的关系。
In fact, the Chinese Communist Party has kidnapped the Chinese government and the Chinese people. This is not a normal state of governance. What is understood in the West in regard to government is not the same in China.
The system of government, but also I think that I want to get into this notion of what we define human rights as. I think there's a very different conception of human rights here in the United States than the Chinese Communist Party claims as a human right in China. I read something about the 4 freedoms or something where one of them, for example, is your right to obey the Communist Party, and your right to agree that everything that President Xi says is accurate. So you have a right to obey.
Right.
But those are not what we would think of in the West as human rights, Reggie.
Well, in the West, like in the United States was founded by people who believe in God, and they said that that we find these things self-evident, that people have unalienable rights. They're unalienable because they come from God, and that no government has the right to abrogate these rights, to violate these rights. Now, in contrast, the Chinese Communist Party is officially atheistic, and they believe that, I mean, basically, they've put themselves in some ways in the place of God. They believe that they're the one who defines human rights, and if they decide to give somebody a right, then they have a right, and if they decide to take the right away, then they don't have the right, because they're the ones who decide what rights people have.
So the authority, not from God, from the state.
Exactly. And that makes everybody sort of an appendage of the state.
Huchen, do you have what's your view on this? You're a close observer of this through Voice of America. How would you characterize
the concept of human rights,
yeah,
interpreted by the Chinese government is totally different from what we think and what we're used to in the West. They stress the most important aspect of human rights is the right to survive. If the Chinese people survive, then they have human rights. It's ridiculous. They do not believe you have the right to think freely, to speak freely. They think if you think differently, if you avoid dissent, you are an enemy of the Chinese Communist Party. As bad as that, it's a crime to say different things other than the Chinese Communist Party, to post comments on the internet. So basically, they put a tape on your mouth.
Well, aren't there something like 500,000 internet police based in and around Beijing?
Maybe more in around Beijing, but over the whole country, who knows?
Well,
Millions.
We were.
And they all get paid 50 cents.
There's a phrase for those 50 centers for their comments on I've had a few YouTube comments from 50 centers, so welcome to the show.
Hope they get a raise. 52 cents.
You may get $1 for this one. Well, Guancheng, you're an extraordinarily courageous man to step up and take on these issues when you're in your 20s, and you paid the price for it. How many other people are there like you in China? If this is, if these abuses are so pervasive, is there an undercurrent of resistance in the country?
我觉得实际上中国呢，这种抵抗从来没有停止过，而且随着互联网的发展，大家了解了国际社会，了解了人权，了解了民主，了解了不同的这种专制之外的社会制度之后，民间的反抗越来越多，越来越激烈。这一点呢，从中共每年花费的用来对付自己人民的维稳经费比国防开支还要高，甚至到现在共产党就不敢公开每年花在控制中国人民的这个维稳经费是多少。这个数字来看，实际上中国的这种反抗、争取人权的行动是越来越强烈，尤其是在民间。
The resistance has always been there, and with the development of social media and the internet, people in China are now understanding and are now knowing more and more about the international society, about human rights and democracy. Therefore, the resistance is becoming bigger and more vigorous. That's why the Chinese Communist Party spent enormous amount of money on maintaining social stability. And these days, they don't dare even to let the outside world know how much money they spend on maintaining social stability.
Well, you had asked if there's other people like Guangcheng in China, and the answer is no. I mean, he is one of a kind. So, I mean, I would not disagree with anything that they just said in terms of that the resistance is building because there are more and more people knowing it through the internet. But I will say that finding somebody who will stand up to the Chinese government from Chinese soil is very rare. And he went to jail for 4 years for doing it. We haven't even talked about how he was under house arrest, how he and his wife were tortured, their ribs were broken, all kinds of horrific things happened to them. And then once he escaped, his family was persecuted, tortured horribly. This is what happens to people who dare to expose the atrocities of what's going on in China from Chinese soil. There's one other person that I know of, and I don't know what his name is, but someone whose wife was forcibly aborted late term felt he and his wife were so totally shattered by this experience, they decided that they didn't care whether they would die. And so he went and started documenting the forced abortions, forced sterilizations, and other horrible things that were happening around his area and got them out to the United States. And then I got a hold of them. That was the basis of my first testimony in the U.S. Congress. But that's the point people have to get to, because anyone who accuses the Chinese government of a human rights violation from Chinese soil will be heavily persecuted, and their families and neighbors. And they have to get to the point where they just feel like they don't care whether they live or whether they die. They're just going to tell the truth.
Well, I think Guancheng's made the point also that a lot of the people have been forced out of the country. I mean, I think the view is that if you're going to be a dissident, you're not going to stay in China. So the people have not necessarily been imprisoned in China, but they've been exiled.
实际上能够有机会出来的还是很困难，就是能够有机会出来的人很少。在中国这种状况下，就是说中共对于中国的人权捍卫者，对于已经觉醒了要推动中国实现民主的这些人，他是不择手段的进行迫害，一般人很难就是说能够挺得过来。这种肉体上的折磨、酷刑，精神上的折磨，以及对整个你的家庭甚至你家族的不择手段的打击，可能这样的故事能够真正传出来，让全世界了解中共是怎么打击民间社会的。这个我觉得我们还需要想办法让更多的人了解这整个过程。
Actually, there have been only a few people who could leave China. Most of the most of the human rights defenders in China still suffer a lot. The Chinese Communist Party spares no methods to persecute all these human rights defenders, and it is really very, very hard for these people to withstand all the suffering, both emotionally and physically.
实际上，就像当年他们对待我，我一直就是不管中共采取什么样的手段，我就是不给他屈服。那到监狱里以后，那中共既然用法律把我送进监狱，那我就拿着法律去找中共，那你违反了这个什么样的法律？后来共产党就干脆就通过这个狱警指使，直接命令这个杀人犯带着一群犯人就把我拖进监室，进行长时间的殴打酷刑，就是说他已经不再讲道理，他已经不再讲法律，他就是问你服不服，这样一个概念。所以当时我的肋骨也很有可能是被打折，当然他不会告诉我，因为我疼了很长时间。
Guancheng says, this is like what I went through in China. They treated me with a lot of violence, very harshly, but I was determined not to succumb to those pressures. And they threw me into prison in the name of law, so I fought them with what they call their law. And finally, they did not reason with me. They didn't talk about law with me. They just gathered some hooligans in the prison to beat me up. And I suspect several of my ribs were broken when they beat me.
Why did they let you live?
他们为什么让你活下来？
其实他们在中间也曾经想办法对我进行折磨，比如说他找一些医生来假装给我吃一些药。其中那个医生，因为有一次呢，我在那儿，比如说我就被他折磨的，我的胃就急剧的收缩，往外吐。然后他找一个医生来呢，给我一个药，就是说是加重我的胃收缩的一个药。那如果我用他这个药的话，我很有可能就胃就穿孔了。如果他不给我及时治疗，那就是结果就可想而知。但是我也学过医，我就拒绝用他的药，他没有给我强灌。我觉得中共呢，就是说最后毕竟因为国际社会关注的力度非常大，他不能直接的就是说灌上这样的药让我在监狱里出现问题，但是他是试图用这样的就是软手段，比如说我给你吃药，你治病呢，你吃了以后发生状况，他可能就说没有问题。
I can't say they didn't try that. They tried various ways to torture me. Let me give you an example. I suffered from stomach troubles, and I vomited quite a bit. So they sent a doctor to see me, and he prescribed medicine. And it so happens that I studied medicine as well, and I knew if I took his medicine, there would be holes in my stomach. In other words, I would die. Basically, the reason that I didn't die in prison was because of the attention the whole international society was given to me and people like me in China. If I died in prison, it would cause an uproar in the international society.
Well, we've touched on this. I mean, the infanticide or the gender side is a real war on women, but what about the status of women generally in China?
Well, I mean, I think that there's a lot of domestic violence in China. And another thing that people don't even think about in terms of the one-child policy, the hidden victims are widows. So we're dealing with gendercide at the beginning of life and then widows at the end of life. Because of the one-child policy, the population has gone down, and now the elderly population has zoomed up, and the suicide rate among elderly has zoomed up 500% in the last 20 years in connection with the one-child policy. China has the highest female suicide rate of any country in the world, and in the Chinese countryside, we have 3 times the number of women as men killing themselves. So
well, it seems like this whole one of the aspects of this is a real dismantling of traditional Chinese culture.
that's right.
I mean, the civil society, the family, the respect, the taking care of the elders. I mean, the Communist Party has really destroyed the fabric of the traditional society.
Yes, because in traditional society, a farming couple, like in the rural areas, would have a lot of children, and they would have a lot of children. And then when the original couple got older, the extended family would help them in their old age, and they venerated the elderly. And now with the one-child policy, you'll get a situation where you have a couple, each of them is an only child. They have to support 4 parents, 8 grandparents, themselves, and their one child or their 2 children, and they just can't do it financially. So the elderly are just being abandoned, and they are killing themselves.
So the net effect of this is that, I mean, you think about the extreme of the states, they take 1984, you want to isolate the individual, and you don't want to have to give the individual have the individual have no other support, no family, no extended family, no civil society institutions, no religion. It's just you and the state. Mm-hmm. And that seems like where this is going and has gone. Guancheng?
Yeah. 实际上呢，我觉得在中国这个共产主义的这种破坏之下，最大的一个伤害啊，就是，尤其是在这个一胎化政策屠杀胎儿，让中国人这个对于生命的尊重完全的丧失了。原来在中国传统文化当中有一个叫人命关天的概念，也就是说，不管怎么样，一旦出现人命，那这个事情就必须有一个说法。可是随着共产党这个政策的推出，这个人命关天概念在中国非常非常淡，对中国这种社会道德的摧残是不可逆的，是非常严重的一个破坏。
The most severe damage communism has done to China, especially the one-child policy has done China, is to lose the respect for life, for human life. Mm-hmm. In old China, people believe people's lives matter. It is as important as the heaven itself. But this concept is gradually fading. This is the worst damage that communism has done to the Chinese culture and Chinese society.
实际在中国早期，中国也是一个神传文化的国家，他们也相信上天有这个神灵来护佑着这个人类。他们也不就说，如果你做了坏事，你可以让人不知道，但你没办法让神不知道。但是共产党去了以后就宣传说，人根本就没有什么神，我们人就是物质的，那你死了就什么都没有了，所以你不要管别的，你就不管来世，不管将来，你就尽管的做你想做的就可以了。那这样一种结果就导致中国文化的一个从根本上的一个破坏。
In old China, people believed in religion. Mm-hmm. They believed there is God up there watching people, watching what you do. But these days, because of the rule of the Chinese communists, people do not believe in God anymore. They don't think God is omnipresent. You can do bad things and still get away with it. You don't care about your next life. You only care about the present, about the benefits of what you are doing to yourself. That's the most fundamental change in Chinese culture after the rule of the Chinese communists.
Well, this is extremely sobering, because I think as Americans we thought that in the 70s, 80s, 90s we open up the doors to trade and bring people in to do business in China, trade with the China, let the Chinese come here and have Confucius centers and do things like that, that we'd be creating a Western liberal democracy. And it seems like instead of going towards that, it's gone just the opposite direction.
Well, yeah, I mean, Xi Jinping is possibly the most repressive ruler since
Xi
Mao.
is the current president.
The current president.
And just made himself president for life
well,
last year.
He abolished term limits. Basically, I mean, President Trump joked that Xi Jinping is like king, okay? But it's not funny, because if you're president for life, how's that different from being king? I mean, he basically has absolute power, and he's gotten himself in a situation that he will have it for the rest of his life.
But you say he's grabbed the power, but he's made it, if anything, he's worse than what had come before.
Yes. I mean, Huchen, would you like to address that?
Yeah, Huchen, would you weigh in?
Yeah. Xi Jinping basically has grabbed power for the rest of his life, and which is very, very dangerous. He has no check and balances on him. And worst of all, he has a whole bunch of lieutenants around him who tell the Chinese people he is the greatest leader in the Chinese history, even greater than Mao Zedong, even greater than Deng Xiaoping. And all the Chinese people are urged to study Xi Jinping's thoughts, his speeches, his quotations, and there's real danger that China would plunge into a second cultural revolution.
Absolutely.
People overlook this. They say, well, the Chinese nation suffered a lot through the Cultural Revolution. This cannot happen again.
Cultural
but I
Revolution,
tell people, it's a real reality. It's very possible another cultural revolution will come, and Chinese nation will endure even harsher difficulties, greater sufferings than during 1966 and 1976.
Reggie?
Well, I was going to just add to what Huchen was saying about that people are being encouraged or urged to study Xi Jinping thought. Well, because of cell phones and computers, they're being monitored about whether they are studying this thought. And if they are looking at the wrong things, it can affect that. They have these social credit scores.
Yeah, let's talk about social credit.
They have these social credit scores, which if you have a high score, you'll be able to do things like travel, borrow money, not be detained. If you have a low social credit score, you can be restricted in terms of your travel. You might lose your job. You will not be able to borrow money.
How is it monitored, and what are they monitoring?
Okay, so one of the things I was just mentioning to begin with that they were monitoring is if you go on the websites where you have Xi Jinping thought and you read his thoughts and you read his speeches, your social credit score will go up.
So they're watching you on the internet.
totally-
They're watching what
It's
pages
very
you look
scary.
Yeah.
They know what you are watching and what you are saying, literally. So I have friends telling me at night they open their cell phone and go to a certain app and leave it open, and next morning, their work unit tell them, you did well last night. You studied for 3 hours. They know what you are doing.
Well, you said something that I find interesting. The Chinese, I think of the Chinese as being very, very, very bright and clever in many ways. And it seems to me like you've got a pervasive Communist Party, 27 million surveillance cameras, social credit. It seems to me, though, that people are going to begin to game the system. I mean, how much control can they really exert? And anyway, Reggie, this is.
Well, Huchen was just talking about a way to game the system, which is to leave your app open for all night, and then you come to work the next morning. And they say, "Hey, good job! You're up reading, Xi Jinping thought all night." But that's not very. That's not going to really very effective. It's like you can game the system in a very small way, but you can't game it in such a way that that you go off the grid and are able to sort of live your life and think your own thoughts.
实际上，在中国我插一点啊，在中国就是共产党运用现代的西方科技来控制中国人民。比如说，我可以举几个例子：一，中共现在通过香港的一些公司租用了9颗美国的卫星来协助他们控制中国人民。那么另一方面，中共利用美国的高科技，在中国广泛的建立了这个叫面部识别系统和动态识别系统。他们通过几亿个摄像头，把他们不喜欢的人个人的这个信息存在里边。如果你一个人，你去北京，你去某一个城市，那他就可以通过他电脑系统来知道你这个人在哪里，在干什么。而且，你即使换上不同的服装，他也能根据他的这个识别系统存的你的更多的信息来知道你在哪里。
Guangcheng says, one thing that horrifies him is that the Chinese Communist regime is utilizing technology and science that they get from the West to control its own people. He says, the Chinese government signed a contract to use 9 man-made satellites from the West through a company in Hong Kong to control the Chinese people, especially they use the technology of facial recognition and movement recognition. If any undesirable person goes to Beijing, no matter what kind of clothes he wears, he will be recognized.
所以从90几年，美国觉得帮助中国发展经济，中国经济发展了，民主自然到来，这是刚才我们说这是一个非常错误的。在这个过程中，西方民主国家实际上是帮助了中共做大，帮助了中共有能力更好的控制中国人民，帮助中共让中国人民和中共的控制能力，就是反抗能力和控制能力之间的距离在不断的加大。
Since the 1990s, the United States government and some other Western governments believed that if the Chinese economy developed, its democracy would grow as well. But actually, what they have been doing is to help the Chinese communists to become bigger and stronger and in a better position to control the Chinese people.
Right. We thought that we were opening the door to democracy by getting them most favored nation status. Although I have to say, that was to me one of the most appalling things is that when all the way up until the Clinton administration, whether it was a Republican or a Democrat in office, most favored nation or our trade relationships with China was predicated upon their human rights record. And under the Clinton administration, that became delinked. Most favored nation from human rights in China. And so now we have very little bargaining power with them.
Yeah, for years, this was talking about human rights was off the table.
Yeah, right. And so we're dealing with the results of that now.
Yeah.
But the whole idea of maybe bringing them in, helping them economically, helping them open up to be, a more capitalistic society, hoping then that would translate into greater human rights has actually backfired. And what it's done is it is fueled and funded an increasingly totalitarian repressive regime.
And the Chinese communists believe basically Western people and their governments are naive. They're easy to be manipulated, and they're easy to be conceited.
You've been reading my Yahoo chat board,
Yes.
or not the
So
YouTube chat board.
I would say
that's the comment.
wake up
yeah.
and open
Yeah.
up our eyes. You cannot tolerate evil. You cannot treat evil with kindness.
I have a question for Huchen and Guangcheng, which is, what would you say about the U.S.-China trade deals? Is it right to be hard on them? I mean, and what is the history of China in terms of actually being faithful to their promises? I mean, is it the case that they will make a treaty with a country, the idea being, oh, well, this country is naive and we'll make a treaty with them, get the benefit of the treaty, knowing that down the line they're going to actually break their side of the deal?
我觉得如果美国真正去从人权的角度去对中共进行制裁的话，中国人民是非常支持的，这是第一个。第二个，中共经济手里的经济，也就是说没有钱来控制中国人民的话，中共这个专制政权就会倒台。
From the point of view of human rights, most of the Chinese people would support the United States to sanction Chinese government and especially the Chinese communists. If they do not have the amount of money that they have now, they cannot control the Chinese people indefinitely.
还有就是说，中共 跟美国的这种交易啊，美国原来就是从90几年开始，美国政府一直强调啊，中国的市场非常重要啊，怎么样啊？中共也经常拿着中国的订单，也就是市场这个经济大棒来打美国。如果哪个公司不听话，他就会惩罚他，用这样的手段。但是从中美最近的这个贸易战争来看呢，实际上美国的市场对于中共来说，要比中国的市场对于美国人来说重要的太多了。关键的问题是，美国人不想真正为了中国人的人权而去站起来，这是非常值得我们关注的一个问题。
Since the 1990s, the Chinese communists have been stressing the huge market in China, and the Chinese government has been flaunting their orders, saying we can buy big things from you. But from the ongoing trade war between the U.S. and China, we can tell that the U.S. market is more important than the market in China.
对，所以中共呢这几年以来，就说它壮大了以后，它不仅在中国控制人们的思想，在中国拼命的拆教堂、毁这个家庭教会，它同时也把魔爪伸到了美国来。中共花很多钱来控制美国的媒体，来控制美国的大学，不让他们做更深入的中国的这个研究和批评。实际上就是说，美国花钱来支持中共，最后达到的一个效果就是让中共来破坏美国社会的价值和结构，这是非常可怕的。而且这种事情，很多美国人在不知不觉当中就已经相信了。那当有人提出来，我第一次提出来中共对美国的渗透和影响的时候，来自很多美国人的批评。当然现在他们明白了，但是也是让我感觉到这个更危险。
As the Chinese Communist Party gets stronger over the past few years, they are doing all the bad things in China to its people, including dismantling churches and disbanding family churches, or some people say underground churches. At the same time, they have extended their arms to this country. They're spending big money to control the media and also universities, research institutions. Do not allow them to say bad things in China. A few years ago, I talked about Chinese infiltration and control in this country, and I received a lot of criticism. A lot of them come from US scholars. But now people believe this is indeed what's been happening.
So the control extends not just within China, but throughout the world.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's pervasive. Yeah. And
so,
we have, in the PR front, I guess we have Confucius Institutes.
But the Confucius Institutes are propaganda arms of the Chinese government, where they give different schools or universities these Confucius Institutes, and the university says, okay, this is great. They're all self-funded. We can now offer Chinese, but what they're doing also is offering propaganda. Is that correct?
That's absolutely true.
Sure.
Okay, and another problem is that that the scholars, the Chinese scholars or the Americans who want to do scholarship in China, a lot of the Chinese departments in universities are partially funded or heavily funded by the Chinese government that can yank your funding if you criticize them, and they can certainly yank access. Like if a scholar, scholars can criticize China on a number of bases. For example, with respect to the one-child policy, you can criticize China on a demographic basis. You could say this is bad for China. Look at the aging population. Look at the way that the workforce is flowing. But you cannot say you are forcibly aborting people. Okay, if you do that, if you step over that line, then a scholar runs the risk of not being allowed back into China. So they're silencing from the West the voices of criticism to China and even freedom of scholarship. Academic freedom is compromised.
Well, didn't they recently, I guess they've closed about 100 Protestant Christian churches, but didn't they also reach an agreement with the Holy See, the Catholic Church, that China would now be appointing the bishops?
Yeah, okay.
And that the Holy See gets, I guess it gets veto rights, but that doesn't sound like... Well,
yes. Okay, so as a Catholic, I'm very, very concerned about this. So China and the Vatican came to an agreement. The Catholics said that they wanted to unify the underground church with the official church. But what's been happening is no one has disclosed what's in that agreement. And the Chinese government has been abusing that secrecy by going around to Catholic churches and saying, the Pope says that you need to be shut down or destroying Catholic shrines. And the Catholics have undergone tremendous persecution since that agreement. And they can't defend themselves because no one knows what's actually in the agreement.
Well, how many Christians are there in China? Is it 10 million,
I've
50
seen
million?
figure that says there are about 200 million
200
Christians in China. We don't know the exact number.
Well, that's significant. That's 15%.
Yeah, that includes people in
Population's about 1.3 billion, so you're
1.4.
yeah, 1.4.
And I've seen a
12%.
scholar that says China will become the biggest Christian country in about 20 years.
So Christianity is growing in China.
It's growing despite all the persecution and crackdown.
Or maybe because of the persecution. It's said that blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. So the Chinese government has knocked down thousands of crosses across China, and it's just there was an incident where they were bulldozing a church, and a pastor's wife and others were trying to stop the bulldozer, and she actually got bulldozed, and she was killed by the bulldozer. So she died trying to stop her church from being knocked down.
There will be martyrs. There are true believers. There are some other people who I do not believe that they're quite sincere when they say they're Christians, but we do believe there are a lot of sincere believers in China.
Absolutely, because anybody who survives the persecution of China is refined like gold.
So there's so much to get into here, particularly that Americans really don't understand or know much about. But in the interest of sort of wrapping this show up before we get on to our next show, as I'm sure there will be, where do you see this going? I mean, is the Chinese Communist Party vulnerable in any sense? 5 years, 10 years, 15, where are we in the trajectory?
我觉得是这样，中国未来肯定要发生民主化。那么在这个民主化的过程中，那么要怎么样实现，取决于西方政府对于中共的认识是不是能够迅速的到位。我觉得实际上为什么中国这么多的信仰者啊，基督教也好，天主教也好，法轮功也好，越来越多，就是因为共产党原来靠欺骗获得中国人民的支持的这种形式已经发生根本的改变，老百姓已经不相信共产党了。那么共产党控制中国两个手段，一个是谎言，一个是暴力。那他现在你不信任我了，我就直接对你施加暴力，这就是中国一个现实状况。那中国人民在认清共产党的暴力本性以后，肯定这个反抗会越来越严重。在这个反抗的过程中，就是说西方政府能不能迅速的站到中国人民一边来支持中国人民建立起民主制度，这是一个非常关键的问题。那么在中共大把的钱来对西方的这种收买，如果他不能迅速的做出一个正确的选择，可能中国付出代价要大，实现民主要慢，但是肯定也会实现。
I can surely say that the future of China is democratization. How soon and how it will happen depends on how the Western countries perceive China and understand China. There are a lot of people in China who do not believe the Chinese government anymore. And the Chinese Communist Party has always controlled the country and its people through two things. One is lies, the other one is violence. Now their lies don't work as well as in the past, so they're resorting more and more to violence. That means people's resistance will become more and more fierce. The Chinese Communist Party is throwing money everywhere throughout the world. the Western government should have a clear understanding of what the Chinese Communist Party is doing and adopt very good policies toward China.
That's so well said, and I think with that we'll end this conversation. Reggie Littlejohn, Chen Guancheng, and Huchen Zhang. Reggie?
Oh, I just want to say there is one little note of hope here because the whole thing with China.
That sounded like a note of hope.
Yes, that's true. But we're inside of China actually saving baby girls and widows. We're the only organization that has a network on the ground inside of China that is able to save these baby girls from gendercide and these widows from suicide. So.
Well, I have 3 plugs.
Oh.
One is for you and your organization. Talk about that and where can we find you?
Oh, okay. Thank you. My organization is Women's Rights Without Frontiers, and we are an advocacy organization. I spent years advocating for Chen Guancheng's release, so I was a leader of the international movement of that, and so that's part of our advocacy. And we also are the main ones who were exposing the truth that China was continuing to forcibly abort women when they were denying it. And then we also have boots on the ground inside of China. We're the only organization in the world that I'm aware of that is actually able to we're inside of China, saving baby girls from sex-selective abortion and saving abandoned widows from destitution and possible suicide. So that's what we do.
You're 501c3.
We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization.
And we can contribute to you on your website?
You can go to Women's Rights Without Frontiers and just click Save a Girl or Save a Widow, and you can contribute to one of those campaigns. It's the only way that you can actually go to your money will go to the door of a family, of a baby girl, or of a widow, and actually help them very directly.
Terrific. That's and then we have a book, The Barefoot Lawyer, that Guancheng has written. It's a wonderful book. Describes your journey through China and your imprisonment, your escape, and the work you've done since then, and gets into a lot more depth and emotional detail than we were able to cover in this show. But it's wonderful, and I highly recommend it. It's on Amazon. I own the Kindle version. Recommended. And Huchen Zhang, thank you so much for joining Voice of America. What is your what we can say about Voice of America and what it's doing in China?
Well, there's a lot of controversy about what Voice of America is doing in China, but that's a long story. Basically, we try to reach the Chinese people with news of what's happening in China and in the United States. And Voice of America has been broadcasting to China for 75 years and more, and I hope this tradition will go on.
Great. Well, thank you, and thanks for joining me. And this has been a tremendously interesting and I hope hopeful discussion we've had about China and its future. So, thanks for joining.
Thanks for listening. Want more? Be sure to subscribe at thebillwaltonshow.com or on iTunes.